Patient. Thanks, Owen.
Thanks. So I'm from Atherton Tableland near Cairns, and I'm a physiotherapist by trade who got involved in dance about 10... it's getting a little bit more than that. I'm also a member of the Australian Society of Performing Arts Healthcare through my physio role, and dance is of great interest to that group. So a lot of resources on their website, by the way, in regard to all sorts of health issues that performing artists might face. That's ASPAH. I'm going to offer today a series of cases, people I've worked with or just come across over the last few years, since 2019, since the last Bold Festival. Our first slide I've got up there is a part of an ensemble that worked on some Shakespearean sonnets a couple of years ago. And I've just chosen that photo. A company called Tropical Arts in Cairns does an inclusive Shakespearean set every year. And that photo is inclusive both ethnically as well as ability-wise. I'd like to just talk about the Shakespearean sonnet that we did with that small group. And I'm doing this particularly because in my own work I use poetry quite a bit. Devouring time, blunt thou the lion's paws, and make the earth devour her own sweet brood. Pluck the keen teeth from the fierce tiger's jaws, and burn the long-lived phoenix in her blood. Make glad and sorry seasons as thou fleets, and do whate'er thou wilt, sweet-footed time, to the wide world and all her fading sweets. But I forbid you one most heinous crime. O carve not with thy hours my love's fair brow, nor draw no lines there with thine antique pen. Him in thy course untainted do allow, for beauty's pattern to succeeding men. Yet do thy worst, old time, despite thy wrong, my love shall in my verse ever live young. The performance that we did was really a physical theatre against the backing voices who spoke an adaptation of that sonnet. Now, I've got to make sure I do that. Where do I click that? There we go. One of the things I've been doing during the COVID lockdown era has been attending weekly Zoom meetings with a small alumni group of the Being a Leader course that I attended in 2018. Reviewing the course in detail has created for me a development in my awareness of where leadership resides, not as the person of authority or title, but as a particular motion of a particular person at a particular time and place. And you might ask, what does that have to do with new legacies in Australian dance? In Cairns, I facilitate a group we call ourselves Beautiful Chaos. And a recent participant, Trinity, is a 45-year-old transgender woman with Down syndrome. Trinity loves dance. She engages enthusiastically in class and performance, and in available moments spoke about her family, gender reassignment, and a lifelong delight with dance, including burlesque, which was a bit out of my past. So if anybody has a way of providing remote access to Trinity with burlesque, please come and talk to me. Now, Trinity's way of showing up for dance and the team has been, for me as the facilitator, a delightful challenge in provoking without overwhelming Trinity's memory and creativity and movement conceptualisation. In performance design, I placed myself in the performance role from which I could cue for Trinity. So back to those leadership meetings. One meeting, a woman who had been doing this work in leadership for a number of years declared in exasperation that she didn't see herself as a leader. In that moment, I saw how I was inspired by Trinity. her stand for her gendered self and her dance, and for the team of us as well. How her presence in just a few short months has improved my own capability in inclusive facilitation work. I noted this to the I'm Not a Leader woman, and who admitted with some insight as she found that phenomena of Trinity as leader real and powerful and reassuring to herself. I'm leaving you with these cases a little open-ended so that you can wonder on, oh yeah, what are we really dealing with here in dance and with people of various abilities and our relationships, perhaps as dance facilitators or choreographers and the team themselves. Just after the last Bowl Festival, I took a tour of my movement training model and dance model through the USA, and then presented at a workshop in Israel, the International Scientific Conference for Movement and Cognition. It was a conference set up by a group of neurologists who wanted to talk to people who actually were involved in the movement, and they realised, oh, there's these people called dancers. So it's a conference of neurologists and dancers, and so then they invited the rehab professionals like physios and occupational therapists along. I also found myself, one of the participants in the workshop I did for them was actually a linguist doing a PhD on the movement in the evolution of language. Other people that I worked with, I'll present here, and including Heidi Latsky, who I won't present here, but who is going to be online tomorrow morning. So for any of you, that'll be a wonderful session. My first case is a person who's become a dear friend, Wayne Gilbert. Now, Wayne is a literary teacher and he's a performer poet, and he's had Parkinson's disease for now 23 years. A few years after he had Parkinson's disease, he heard David Leventhal on news in USA, and he had a niece who was a dance coach and said, would you do this training? And they set up a non-profit, and that now runs Dance for PD as well as other performance arts, and they call themselves Art as Action. The thing with Wayne is that he explains that often people don't think he's got Parkinson's after 20 years, and he puts a lot of that down. Well, he puts some of it down to that, well, he's maybe got a slowly progressive form of Parkinson's. But he puts a lot of it down also to the, weekly or bi-weekly dance work that he's done for that last 20 years. Another group I work with in America was called the Forum Dance Collective over in Gainesville, Florida. They were working on a theme of water. And as you can see in the bottom left photo, all the paper on the floor is the poetry I had them working on. And most of them, as dancers, had never done poetry before. They revealed, well, we haven't written a poem. And so that was a bit interesting for them as an access to how you might draw movement phrases from an idea or a theme. The real value for me in working with them is that they had come together as a group of people, and they're a little bit a bigger group now, I understand, really to cross a social and even racial divide in their town in the United States, and a social economic divide. So it was really fascinating to talk to them, how they saw their community, how they saw those divides operating, and what they thought dance could bring to those issues. One of the most fabulous people I met on that trip is Elise Patterson, who has a neuromotor disorder. She can walk to some degree, and can even do some dance moves on her feet, but with the disability tends to fatigue very quickly. She's a lioness of inclusivity. She has her performance work audio read, has scripts rolling on the back of stage, and she gets a little bit of negative feedback from her audiences, non-disabled audiences sometimes, because there's so much sensory input. They find it very distracting. But she's standing her ground, and I think she set some sort of a benchmark. As you can see in the lower right-hand corner, there are two very excellent dancers dancing in a choreography with a woman whose really only capacity there is to be able to use the electric control on that wheelchair and keep her head up balanced. And so Elisa's work, when I was watching it, and I actually sat down and had coffee with her and talked about an hour about, you know, being a black woman, a young black woman and disabled, and talking about dance funding and dance position in North America. And her strong championing of inclusivity raised quite an area of work, I thought, that has a really great potential in Australia, anywhere in the world, and that is not only how do you involve dancers with disabilities, but how do you involve audiences with disabilities, and how do you cross that bound of inclusivity? Holly's work almost seemed to be like she read my mind of what I was thinking about when I was drafting this presentation, in that, you know, I wondered, you know, is there any way that blind people could physically experience a dance performance? And that's kind of like an open inquiry that doesn't have anything in my imagination around an answer to that. But I think in the whole world of creativity, that's all we do. We open a big empty space and we maybe can throw an inquiry into that, and we don't have to grasp for any answers for it right now, but any little move, any little change or development that we might think could improve that situation may be induced by having some bigger, almost impossible question out there as well. In my presentation in the International Scientific Conference for Movement and Cognition, I really was happy to get some good feedback, mainly from rehab therapists who were amazed at doing. I run on a language metaphor model of movement in a very deconstructive sense. So I get right down to the basis of one finger moving in one direction and how much movement actually is there. And you'll kind of probably know a technical answer to that. But they were just non-dancers who worked in partners for an hour in a workshop and were doing these lovely little choreographies together as partners, and you know, that sets people back. And people can do that for themselves, because I didn't do any choreography for them. It's all done in solve this problem, solve that problem. And what they can find in how that will work with people with all sorts of disabilities. And I came to that technique through dancers who had it sitting there, but with my physiotherapy lens I could see that there was some really good motor learning systems in the dance world that was capable of almost amplifying the motor learning process. This is a great conference. It's run annually now. When I attended it, there were Laban researchers in attendance, teachers like Martha Eddy. The Northern Hemisphere sort of, you know, attracted quite a few from there. So if you ever get a chance or to deliver there, I'd really recommend it. It's usually in a different city. Thank you. Great. I want to go on to my next case, and this is Elise. Elise, who a couple of years ago, I worked with, and is a 16-year-old gal with autism, and who up to the age of 11 was involved in dance and hockey, and then stopped. After a couple of sessions, and she came to me through really a referral through the NDIS, and after a couple of sessions she revealed that she won't go to mainstream dance, you know, enough said sort of thing. And I realised that there was a real issue that Elise had with social anxiety. However, with an autistic personality, she was very upfront with that and would say that, no, I'm not going to do that in front of people. However, we worked on inserting her in the piece, the Shakespearean piece I mentioned at the beginning, and all went seemingly quite well for a while and up to the first performances, and then the anxiety kicked in and she floundered after that herself. In discussing that really with her parents, it revealed to me that there were elements to that, you know, that are in the background story of her that perhaps if I'd known, I would have gone, okay, no, performance maybe in a year or two or something, you know, just not gone there so quickly. And however, working with her showed me a couple of things. One is that in the neurodiverse community, we've probably got a lot of hidden possible aspirations around things like dance. And we can't tap in it because there is a lot of social anxiety also connected with that group of people. And we probably need to work on more bespoke models of training which allow people to really pace themselves, especially young people getting up into their adult years, and you know, pace themselves towards perhaps performance, because I don't think we should ever take performance off the table, even as somebody said here, I never wanted to perform. And yet be able to, you know, have the room and the space for people with social anxiety or autism to, one, work with other people as well as take their time to build up their capacities. Another little challenge there. So my last case is Matthew. Now Matthew, again, found his way to beautiful chaos this last year. He's a man in his 40s. Again, NDIS referred him because he hadn't been really participating in any, you know, recommended activities for some years. He was a grumpy bum. But he kind of came along. He came along. They talked him into it and he came along for a try. And he really got into it, in such that after the first couple of sessions, the carer came back and said, wow, we haven't seen Matthew in this good a mood for years. And in fact, if he gets in a bad mood, we put on the music and say, what did you practice last week at class? And Matthew would be doing what he's doing now, clicking his fingers and dancing around. One of the things I noticed with Matthew and his mood and his responses with things is sometimes because of the intellectual handicap, the conceptualisation of what I was asking in the facilitation model would be a bit overwhelming. And if it was overwhelming, he'd walk away. He'd walk over to his water bottle, he'd drink, he'd ignore everyone. When he first did this, I said to Matthew, I said, was that a bit difficult? And he said, yeah. And I said, yeah, got that. That was a bit difficult. So that's okay. You can hang out until you're ready to come back. And he hung out just as long enough to have a drink of water, and he came back. And I realised that, you know, there's not much agency really goes on in the world of caring for people with intellectual handicap. I could hear and see it in some of the other people that were around him that, you know, he was either getting treated by a child or told how to do literally everything. And I think the only reason that one of the reasons his mood changed, and I think this is something that dancers and dance work can bring, is an adult conversation with people with intellectual handicaps, adults with intellectual handicaps. And I really feel that they're, you know, crying out for it. So those are just a few cases, and I think some of the trajectories that we could potentially see in the unfolding of legacies in Australia for dance and maybe worldwide. And I think we, you know, up in Cairns, we still have challenges really promoting dance, getting people involved, and certainly getting performances developed to a good quality level, especially at the community performance level. So I think performance is life. It might take a while for people to come into dance and to get to performative level stage. However, I think that we need to think of performance not only as a way of presenting an art form to an appreciative audience, but actually as the empowerment of people, as the place where leadership actually occurs from all of the dancers, no matter what ability they have. The transferability of emotional, social and physical skills to the rest of life, and Ruth, I think, raised this as well earlier, and teamwork and leadership. I mean, just thinking of your presentation, Ruth, the potential for connecting, youth dancers, great youth dancers, with people with disabilities at a young age, and what they will learn and others will learn, I think would be huge. So there's a future out there, which the legacy of Australian dance, I think, is powerfully inclusive, collaborative and performative, and that it's embedded in all our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. That's extraordinary work. I'm sure everyone will agree. It's just absolutely fantastic. We need so much more of it. And you talked about leadership, and I think, demonstrating leadership. Everyone who's spoken today has demonstrated a level of leadership that we desperately need in dance. But it's there. It's just not always obvious and not always visible.